It's always a treat to be part of the IJS community. I love these little sit opportunities, especially in the middle of a busy workday for me, and obviously a busy month um, on many levels. So thank you for your dedication to practice, to Jewish mindfulness, and to this moment as well. So I wanted to set the frame a little bit. We're focused on pride. Of course, people come from all different backgrounds and life experiences into this group, but kind of centering that one for a little bit. Um, Two funny things about pride in a sort of Jewish mindfulness context. One of them is a word is the word pride itself, which gava now is has associated with pride as we think of it in the in the English language, but it's also not necessarily one of the attributes that's favored in Jewish tradition. It's actually seen it's seen in the kind of negative sense of the word pride, which also exists in English, right? Like, oh, that person's so proud, or they're so full of themselves and whatnot. And I was reflecting on that a little bit, that both of those, so it used to really only have the negative connotation in Hebrew. Now it has both the negative and the positive. And in English, it does still have that negative side. So what does pride mean that isn't pride in the sort of in that sense? And for me, one of the ways in, of course, there's infinite 70 faces to this, but one of the ways in has to do with whether it's a pride that leads to division or a pride that leads to a kind of wholeness. So in the sense of the negative sense of pride, I always think of it as pride over and against or in opposition to the other. I'm proud because I'm on a higher status, or perceive myself to have more status or more power in some sort of hierarchical sense, or pride in a sense of self and other, or my group that I like and the other group that I don't like. That kind of pride that divides. But of course, we also know and have experienced the pride that unites. And for this kind of pride is one that doesn't set myself up against another person, doesn't try to compare, or my group against another group, but in celebrating myself and my family, and I'll say more about that one in just a moment, and my community, it leads me to more celebration and more solidarity. So it is relevant that yesterday was Juneteenth, centering Black experience in the United States. And for me, having Juneteenth come in the sort of Pride Month, really, I find really moving, because from my position as a white identified person, I can kind of have that cultivation of sympathetic joy and sympathetic pride in the resilience of African Americans, and in the ability to thrive despite so many obstacles and that still remain. And so there's that kind of pride that divides, but maybe also the pride that unites and that brings us closer. So obviously, I'd like to sort of focus on that second kind, the kind that brings us closer, for these next 15 to 20 minutes. I want to go into that with the second word that I'm interested in bringing to our consciousness this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, and that has to do with family. In the Jewish tradition, we have all kinds of wonderful blessings that we make over for family members. The one that immediately came to mind wasn't like the traditional one necessarily, but the one from Fiddler on the Roof, right? The beautiful. We once did at a LGBTQ retreat that I was co-leading. We did a version of the Fiddler on the Roof version of the family blessing, right? May the Lord protect and defend you, which is the traditional, a version of a traditional Jewish blessing. But we did it. We allowed people to identify in the group, not based on chronological age, but whether they wanted to identify as the elders or the children. And some people who were chronologically older, but maybe had come out later in life, or just for whatever reason, identified more in the wanting to receive that blessing. And it's a blessing in Jewish tradition. It's a blessing to receive a bracha, to receive a blessing, and to give one. Right. So the blessing is that kind of experience that unites and not divides. There's not the blesser and the blessee, and only the blessee gets the benefit, and the blesser is I don't know, some kind of like a physical therapist or something, helping you to do the work, or your body to heal. It's a two-way kind of a street. And So my what I'd like to do for this sit, we'll do a little bit of centering, and then I want to actually bring in to our consciousness. You'll have an opportunity to kind of experience that kind of blessing, either blessing our families, probably our families of choice, even more than our families of origin, but whoever you want to call to mind. In some Buddhist traditions, there's a practice of calling up the teacher or the benefactor, somebody who helped us at some point in our lives. And so that'll be our doorway in here, but in a sort of Jewish flavor, maybe even with the tune of that song, the blessing from Fiddler on the Roof in your mind, if that's part of your consciousness, the way it is of mine. All right, I think let's start. I'm going to close my eyes and invite you to do the same if you like. And I'm doing this just to enable myself to center a little bit. First thing I do when I sit is just do a little check, like what's up right now? Is energy low or high? Am I still in rush mode? Am I in quiet mode? Am I in sleepy mode? Where on that spectrum? Just noticing non-judgmentally. That's an opportunity to practice a little bit of Shabbat, a little bit of letting go, of resting, of just allowing experience to be as it is. And then maybe I'll allow a slightly deeper exhale than usual. So having accepted things just as they are, then I incline toward a little bit more restfulness, a little more presence. And like many of you, I sort of automatically, because I've done this a lot, the mind gravitates to the sensations of the breath in the chest, the rising and the falling, the expansion and contraction, however you experience it in your body. And as other thoughts come along, I just greet them as a friend and say, no, right now, no thanks. Just going to sit on the breath a little bit, resting the attention on the physical sensations in the chest. And sometimes the whole point of meditation, mindfulness meditation practice, is just in that relationship to distraction or to other thoughts. So I want to cultivate a warm acceptance and recognition of whatever distracts us, but then also at the same time, we're not pushing anything away, but we're just inclining the attention to where it is nourishing for us, which in this case, for the moment, is resting on the breath. So we'll do that for just a moment. So for this Fiddler on the Roof non-dualistic pride practice, we're going to do it'll be in two parts. It's kind of the same meditation exercise, but in two directions. So the first, I'd like to invite you to bring to mind a teacher or a relative or an elder relative or any kind of elder or mentor that you experienced in your life. They could be alive or dead on this plane or the next. And I want to encourage folks who might be LGBTQ plus identified to, in particular, think about our queer elders. Many of us, we probably in this group, I'm sure, had very wide diversity of experience with our families of origin. Some positive, some really challenging, I'm sure. And you could, it's totally fine to pick a parent or whatever for this, if this practice, if you like, but I'm going to go in the sort of folks who played an important role in my becoming who I am as a not just self-accepting, but self-celebrating person. In my brain right now are about 10 of those people, but I'm going to settle on one of them. And I'm going to imagine that just like in the Jewish practice or ordination of smicha, which we place the hands on another person, I'm going to imagine this person either behind me or in front of me, whichever feels natural. For me, it's like I imagine them kind of almost above me in a certain way, looking down, especially good if this person's no longer alive. But gazing at me in some relation to me with that kind of pride that unites. This is someone who's given me such gifts, you might think to yourself, and someone who I'm so grateful for, and just imagining them happy and grateful for you. We're going to receive the blessing from this imagined projection of this benefactor or this teacher or this elder or this queer elder, whoever it is for you. And I do have the melody from Fiddler on the Roof in my head, but I'm going to focus less on words and just on this notion of blessing, bracha, which to me is connected with that source of light, of pride that we talked about before. So again, I'm imagining the mentor, teacher, helper, relative as if they're kind of with me. If it's helpful for you to have a phrase, as in loving kindness meditation, you might try, may you be blessed. And feeling that it's a two-way street. We'll do that for a couple of minutes. And as you mind, if you get distracted, just come back to visualizing this figure who gave you so much help or blessing in your own life. And deepening this practice just a little bit, I'm going to even put my attention like on the physical heart center and imagine, this is a visualization, right? So you can just imagine your way into feeling blessing and feeling love. It's kind of the secret of Jewish prayer, I think. I'm just going to imagine this connection of light between me and this beneficent elder who I'm so grateful to and grateful for. Someone who helped me become at peace and celebration of who I am. And I can even kind of feel it in the heart, feel the heart open to this channel of blessing. If it's helpful for you, you're welcome to put traditional Jewish words on this, so you can even imagine receiving the traditional blessing. One of them, like Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, or Yasem Lecha, or Yasem Lach Shalom. If those words, either because of the language or the theology, are a block, They're just extra. You don't need to do that at all, of course. Just feeling a connection of blessing from the benefactor, from the mentor to you. And just half a minute more. We'll move to part two. I'm going to gently let the image dissolve a little bit. And mostly just turn the attention back to the body, physical body. Seeing if there's any shift that's occurred. For me, there's kind of a little softness to the breath. And notice the mind is moving a little more slowly, or I should say a little less frantically, which is very sweet for me. It's also totally fine if you notice aspects of the experience which might be difficult. So if the person who you were thinking of has passed, there might be some sadness or grief. We want to welcome that into, obviously, we want to make space for that. Just meeting it with love. That it's those feelings, all our feelings are welcome in this experience. And just enjoying a few quiet breaths. So for the second part of this, we're going to do the same thing, but in a different energetic relationship. So the invitation is to call to mind someone who may be chronologically younger, but doesn't have to be, or somebody who you might give that blessing toward, someone who you might be the elder for. And again, this could be just as before, this could be a biological child, of course, family member. It could also be a student. And one of the things, again, as in the last part with queer families, is that we have these families of choice that grow up around us. Often, even if we had an accepting or a positive family of origin, there is something about the ways in which LGBTQ families of choice come together that's really special. So in mine, there are many, or several, I guess, close friends who are also younger than I am, who I've been lucky to kind of be a bit of an elder for a little bit. Elder doesn't have to mean elder, although it could. It could just mean, if you're a mentor or if you're helping show the way. So of the many, many people you could imagine, I will choose one and invite you to choose one as well. And by the way, it's fine to change in the middle too. If you want to just, I don't know, switch it up to another person. And so again, this practice, if you've done loving kindness meditation in one form or another, this is derived from that. It's very similar from that. But again, with this particular flair or angle of giving blessing. So I'm visualizing the person in front of me in a space of safety and warmth and boundary and acceptance. And a funny thing happens when I wish blessing to this person. Sometimes I'll use the end of the priestly blessing, Yasem Lacha Shalom or Yasem Lach Shalom. May God or may the One grant you peace. I've still got the Fiddler on the Roof Shabbat blessing in my head, so I'll probably be singing that along silently. Especially the wives part, which we always laughed at our LGBTQ retreat warmly. Funny thing happens when I do this blessing practice. I sometimes imagine that the blessing is coming from like behind me, behind or above my head, through me, as if in the Hasidic teachings, I'm just a vessel for this divine light. It's not coming from me necessarily, but through me. So for these last 3 minutes, we'll just wish blessing to this person who nourishes us in this relationship, even as we're the ones who are supposedly the elder or the mentor. It may also be, by the way, someone who needs protection. Also in the traditional Jewish blessing, someone whose life might not be as safe as ours. So wishing that kind of blessing of protection as well. All right, let's do that for 2 minutes. And as before, noticing the body as we act as this vessel, this transmission of divine light, this pride that does not divide but that unites us. Because in feeling whole ourselves, we can appreciate and want the wholeness of others, that they should also have that experience. It's a really good kind of compassion. Wanting what's best for someone else, wanting them to be safe. We'll bring this practice to a close, this sharing of blessing, receiving and sharing of blessing. But just lingering on for like another half minute. Wishing peace to this person. And coming back to our own experience. If there's a smoothness in the breath or in the heart, if there's feelings of whatever kind that have arisen. And we'll just do 3 slow breaths together, inhaling, letting go. Letting go again. And with the last breath, letting go, we can open our eyes if they've been closed. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jay. That was really great.
Thanks.
Please stick around for Q&A and sharing your reflections. We'd love to have the conversation. We are going to offer an opportunity now for anyone who is reciting Kaddish, anyone you were holding in heart heart or mind today. As you say Kaddish, you're welcome to share the name of that person in the chat, and we'll put the text of the Kaddish up on the screen, and you're welcome to unmute yourself as well and join me. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabba v'alma v'ibra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayed b'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agala b'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yit'am v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'ale v'yit'ayal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba v'yishemaya Chaim aleinu ve'al Israel v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei Teichel v'imru amen.
Amen. Amen.
Right. Thank you, everybody. So if you need to depart, wish you tzedchem l'shalom, farewell, and join us back here again, same time, same channel tomorrow, 12:30 Eastern, or whenever you can join us, and anytime on YouTube. And if you're staying here, so glad to have you. Jay, it was really that was a really moving practice about reflecting on pride and like these valences. And I thought it was so useful the way that you distinguished between a pride that divides and a pride that that brings together. And I was also thinking about the blessing practice as one. It's actually a pretty core practice for me. I do a version of that regularly on Shabbat, but I was really struck, especially by describing the family, the families of choice, the chosen families, right, and how that configures itself in your life. So I wonder if you wanted to just reflect a little bit more about that, maybe that aspect in particular, or maybe also how the journey from, what's the relationship between the pride that can divide and the pride that can bring us together also. Like, I think they're shadow sides of each other, right? And so yeah, I wonder about that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, for me, as a parent myself, and I was not a parent when I first did this practice 15 years ago. That pride that unites is so embodied, I think, in the pride that we as parents can take in children. And it's been, again, in my family of choice, I feel like my role as a father has enriched my capacity to appreciate being in analogous roles in my communities, in families of choice. Just to say, like, taking pride in the thriving and the flourishing of others. And I don't know that has to be a kind of part of, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi can coin the phrase from aging to saging. And this is kind of maybe part of that practice. I don't know that it has to be chronologically tied. I think when we're in a relationship of either giving care and helping someone grow in whatever context, that can happen. But for me, that's that connection is like the good, so-called, the good kind of pride is I think embodied in that not self-centered aspect, which parents can feel and benefactors, but this originated almost spontaneously at a Shabbat service at this retreat that I mentioned, and it was just about 15 years ago, a little longer even. And oh my gosh, people were just crying because there is such a complicated relationship. On the one hand, hey God, so it's like this like beautiful. It's a funny aside, by the way. My grandmother in her later years, she grew up in in Lithuania, like in the shtetl. But in her later years, she derived so much comfort more from Fiddler on the Roof songs than from the ones that she had actually grown up with. It's kind of like in our DNA somewhere. Anyway, there was this ambiguous or ambivalent, I should say, relationship between this sort of beauty of the family scene, right, and the Shabbat blessing, and people's experiences, which were not necessarily so beautiful and were not as nurturing or nourishing. And to enact it in a group, in this LGBTQ group, where people were playing these roles for one another in a loving way, was really moving, and people were crying all over the place. And that's usually, as a fellow rabbi, that's the sign of you've had a good Jewish experience. If people are crying, that's the goal. And and that was certainly the case then, and it's just stayed with me.
There's a question that Pam asked in the chat here. Guilt arises because I feel like I let a particular mentor down. Is it best to continue to sit with the guilt, or to move on to bless someone I feel less conflicted about?
Both and
the questions you get in Jewish sets, right?
That's a great question. Yeah, I love that question. I think there's it is both and. I'm not doing that to be clever. It's in a certain way, it's a very classic meditation question, which comes up all the time. So like the easy example is like if you're sitting in a long, let's say half hour or something meditation, and you begin to feel some physical pain, do you sit with the pain, or do you move to alleviate the pain? And the answer is both. It's just the discernment of knowing the time. So it's good to sit with a little bit of difficulty, whether it's physical or emotional, because we can learn to develop a more skillful relationship to it. So rather than immediately, trying to make things better, to just be with the difficult, whether it's physical or emotional, or in this case, like allow that guilt to arise and see what comes up. But then at a certain point, physically or emotionally, we move, right? You don't sit there and injure yourself, or you don't just sit there and grit your teeth and pretend like I can be strong and I'm just going to sit through physical pain no matter what. I guess you could do that, but it's not necessarily the most helpful or compassionate approach. So here is similar. It's like, I think it could be really helpful to allow that guilt to exist in a space of self-compassion. So it arises and it's there, and we don't have to wish it weren't there. It's coming from a place of love, actually, and of caring. There's love for the mentor, and there's sadness over whatever it was that maybe let them down, maybe not. Of course, who knows what their experience really was, but if it becomes, there's just that moment of discernment where it's like, okay, I've done some work on this, and now I'm going to move to some other figure. But I welcome, especially, working in queer communities, you got to welcome whatever shadow arises, because there's so much that's there that, if we just try to avoid the difficult things, we're not gonna get anywhere. So it's both and.
There's some good reflections coming in, and just want to keep encouraging folks to share, what came up for you during the practice also. And then there's a next question that's following, and that related to what you said about physical pain. How do we know when to observe or breathe or accept discomfort and aversion, etc., and when to make a real change?
Yeah, this really is like a classic, great meditator question. And there's obviously no specific, one answer for everyone. I think it's at the point where you're not really doing anything anymore, by which I mean you're just spinning the wheel. Let's say if it's mild pain. Also, it depends. If somebody's with chronic pain, or if they're in pain that's like could be causing an injury, obviously that's the time to move. But let's say it's just some pain. You can do some really good practice around pain for a little while. Let's say there's pain in my knee, so I can just allow it. You just see how it is. I can look at it closely, see if it changes. I can just notice that there's something here that I don't like, and then kind of be at peace with it, right? Because that's the meditation superpower, right? If you can, because there's people who we don't like, or there's encounters that are difficult, or someone says something that's unkind. And if I can create a little bit more mental spaciousness around that, I don't have to, so it's like one of my teachers, Dan Harris, said, you don't have to do 100% of the time, just 10%, a little bit more spaciousness. That'll lead me to better relationships, right? And better in everything. And then at some point, you're just sitting there like, ah, knee pain, and you're just sitting there with the pain. Literally, you could be gritting your teeth, or physically, and that's when you've done the work, and now it's time to move on to something else, because
Yeah.
you're kind of getting into that rut. But I
I feel
love
like
that.
that's,
Yeah.
I feel, I feel, and I feel like that's, that lesson is just one that is constantly, right. We're constantly working on in whatever situation, right? It's
Yeah.
like
It's
when
not
I
about knee
choose to
pain.
enter,
Yeah, yeah.
no, it's not about knee pain. And it almost strikes me that maybe part of it is also when you're investing more, at least for me, when I'm investing more energy in resisting it,
Mm.
than in being able to live with it. Like, okay, now I've reached the point where like, okay, I'm just actually just resisting this and kind of grinding through. Then I know, okay, well then I'm done. Like I shouldn't be here, right?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
want to
we
make
don't
a
want to
change.
surround ourselves with deliberately toxic people to, to enable ourselves to improve as meditators. And look, it's true. Also, look, it's Pride. We were talking before we started that this is a Pride month that could also be Rage month, right, for queer people and for our allies. Um, I'm not going to go there. People who know me, I have a journalism career, and I go there on CNN instead of in meditation. But there's ample cause for feeling unsafe, or for feeling angry, or for feeling threatened personally, physically, actually directly, especially if we're trans, or if we're sort of visibly queer, whatever that means today. And so, we want to invite that in, to be able to maybe soften a little around that rage so that it doesn't consume us. But also we want to keep ourselves safe, right? So I mean emotionally safe. So we don't want to necessarily bring in every horrible thing that's happening in the news if we're trying to build resilience. But we want to have some space where there's just some ability to cultivate spaciousness around what's difficult. I know that for me, anger at public events is a problem. It's a thing that can drain my energy. And sometimes, obviously, there's righteous indignation and there's good anger at injustice. We don't want to just be complacent. So there again, it's back to the knee pain thing, because it's not really about knee pain. So how do you pendulate? How do you titrate just enough of the difficulties so that you are motivated? We want to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, right? If we're feeling too comfortable or too complacent, or not aware of how people are suffering, that's not good. That's not justice. That's definitely not the Judaism that I understand as Judaism. And yet, if we're becoming consumed only by negativity, we also need to take some space. Ratzovashov is the Jewish word for pendulation. You go, and this comes also from trauma informed. There's a whole school of trauma informed mindfulness. You want to approach a little bit, and then you can feel yourself kind of feeling unsafe, or becoming not just tight, but really, and then so you want to step back and approach and come back, and approach and come back. And I think there's that opportunity. And to me, it's all about Retzovashov, and that's what the knee pain teaching really is. And as the commenter said, it's just in life decisions as well. That's true too. But I do love this last thing that Lori put in the chat. I think for me, this to me is like a lifelong process. I don't think we ever get to, maybe in Mashiach, in the Messianic age and the world to come, we'll really get to be, actually now that Jewish renewal thing of just popped in my head. I think, no, it's Debbie Friedman, right? The second paragraph of the Aleinu prayer. And then all the men will be gentle, and all the women will be strong. That there's that utopian idea that we'll get to a place where there's no power relationship in the blesser and the blessed. For me, it really does come from embodying it in this particular practice, but also in general. I do really feel when I'm teaching something, I'm just passing on. I mean, maybe I tweaked it a little bit in my head or something, but I'm passing on what I learned from my teachers. That's true in this exact moment. And it's true over and over again. And it's, to me, remembering that. And, I think there's so that's the internal piece, the pnimiut piece, but there's also the external piece where we just should create structures where the seemingly inevitable power that comes in that relationship is mitigated by structures of accountability, making sure we don't invest in our spiritual leaders so much power that they could abuse that power. And I've never been a guru person in any of my religious or spiritual practices. No offense to people who are. I think it can be really valuable, that model. But for me personally, I've always just been driven more toward a more circular model of spiritual community where we each get to bless each other and everybody has the power for blessing. And a friend of mine one time who's a Baptist minister ordained me as a Baptist minister. I was like, I'm not Christian. I don't think I could really qualify. She's like, in our denomination, we all get to ordain each other, so you're in. She wasn't really forcing me. I would say it was a very loving gesture, but it was funny because she was calling me lovingly, calling me out in a little bit of saying, don't get too authoritarian and hierarchical and movement-y. This is about us. This is about people each having that empowerment. And so I love that question from Lori, because I think I think we struggle with it all the time.
Yeah. And apropos, I mean, we just read a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, it's Korach, actually, isn't it? It's to leave us with a doorknob issue. This in some way is maybe part of the critique of Korach, if we want to give a more generous reading than he typically gets. But we'll save that for tomorrow. I'm going to let Mark take that one up. Anyway, because we're about at our time. But Jay, thank you so much for this time. This is really great. And thank you everybody for joining us. And we will be back here tomorrow for our next edition. And you can always find this and all of our other sets are on YouTube as well. So thanks everybody.